Hey there, welcome to Liam's Library. You know, I have a lot of friends who are Stephen King fans. A lot of online friends, a lot of friends in real life. But a lot of my online friends, I reckon I'd have to say 79% of them know who Joe Hill is and also read Joe Hill. Now, for you out there that don't know, there is another horror writer who is kind of similar to Stephen King. His name is Joe Hill. He is, in fact, Stephen King's youngest son. His name is Joseph Hillstrom, or Hillstrom, I think, King. But he wanted to make his way into the world of literature on his own merit. So he changed his name to Joe Hill. Apparently, as the rumour goes, his agent didn't even know he was Stephen King's kid. Was just happy to be receiving these manuscripts and stories and such. But I have spoken about Joe Hill on this channel before. And of course I've spoken about his father, Stephen King, to no end. The reason I wanted to talk to you today, I'm prepping for my big Halloween review next week. So, at the end of next week, just to knock October on the head, I'll probably be all done up in my delicious satanic costume. So tune in for that because it's going to be a really cool review. Something special, I promise. But I just wanted to talk to you because I talk to myself a lot. And I was sick of talking to myself about this subject. So I thought, well, tune in and let's discuss these two. Let's discuss father and son as writers. Now, I don't want to just discuss them in a broad, general kind of a way. I actually have a topic. And it's not the difference between Steve and Joe. It's what does Joe know about Steve that has made him a good writer? Now, I always get Joe's back because the first thing I'll say to someone that says, oh, Joe's nowhere near as good a writer as his dad is, you know what? Joe, every single horror story of Joe's, even his non-horror stuff, which there's not much of, is character-based. It's so character-based. It's written from the heart. You have to care about these people before Joe Hill fucks with them and puts them in scary situations. Same as Stephen King with his characters. Now, I've been reading Stephen King since I could nearly open my eyes, like a little kid. Some people don't believe how young I was when I started, but trust me, I've been studying this guy for just under 30 years, and I'm only 36. Now, he writes from the heart. Stephen King writes from the heart. We know this, right? But there's, a clever thing that we also know he does. Now, I have a few examples. Stephen King is going to tell you a story about a woman who was killed. She's now a ghost. And this person has to find out what happened to her. He's suffering writer's block. His dead wife is also haunting him. That's a horror story, right? But Stephen King, this is also, you'll know what I'm talking about. This is Stephen King's Bag of Bones. Now, in Bag of Bones, I just told you the synopsis. Now, Dean Koontz would have written that story. And that would have been the story. And you would have cared for the characters and it would have been a good story. But for some reason, the whole first part of that book constantly reflects on Daphne du Maurier's ghost novel, or novella, whatever it is, Rebecca, about a woman who was murdered. And her spirit is crying out to find out what happened to her, which is what Bag of Bones is about, right? But I understand the connection, but even if you don't understand the connection, there's something about Bag of Bones. You're not just reading about this guy named Mike who's got writer's block, his wife just died, and strange occurrences start happening. Because every night he has this dream, and the dream connects to this old novel that I have written all these years ago by Daphne du Maurier, and it's Last Night I Dreamt I Went to Manderley Again. Now, I didn't start reading real classic Victorian horror and English horror stories till after I'd nearly read everything by Stephen King. So when I read Bag of Bones, I'd never read anything by Daphne du Maurier. I didn't read Rebecca, but I thought it was cool. I thought there was just something that every other book, every other author I was reading at the time was lacking. So why don't they all put this kind of stuff in there? Like with actual chapter headings that reflect what our protagonist is thinking about, and he's thinking about other material that exists in our world. In Pet Sematary, Lewis is constantly thinking of the Ramones. Hey ho, let's go, that song, the Blitzkrieg Bop. We know that from the movie, but in the book it's quite prominent. We'll get back to Pet Sematary because that comes into this. But that's just the first part. That's the first part of Bag of Bones. It's constantly referring to Rebecca. Even if I didn't know Rebecca was about a woman who was murdered, I really enjoyed knowing that there was a book out there. And you know what? The way he put it into this story, I understand Mike Noonan had read it as a writer, but I also understood that Stephen King read it. And he obviously really respected it because it undertones the entire start of the book. Now, that's not the end of Bag of Bones, because I'm not going to... I have to do a really big review on Bag of Bones one day. It's the best romance Stephen King's ever written, ever. There is no more two human people in love and so tragic than Mike and Maddie. He's really tried to duplicate that, but he's never even come close. Everything else... Not everything else. Some of it is a real cliche. Like, Ben and Susan. It's so cliched, right? From Salem's Lot. But Mike and Maddie from Bag of Bones. That's real writing. That is good writing, man. Anyway, we're getting a little off topic, but not really, right? This is me talking to you. Now, that's what I mean. So Stephen King is writing this horror novel, but there's two references in there. Okay, no, I didn't get to the end reference yet. Okay, so the first reference is Manderley, which is Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. As you keep reading Bag of Bones, another theme keeps popping up. Now, Ray Bradbury wrote a lot of science fiction stories and science fiction horror stories about the planet Mars and Martians. Now, all of a sudden, Ray Bradbury, instead of Daphne du Maurier, takes over as the undercurrent in this ghost story, and it's Mars is Heaven, when all these people... Now, I'm going to tell you about Mars is Heaven by Ray Bradbury. It's a short story. All these people, these astronauts, they land on Mars. They're not the first colony. They're like the 20th or the 30th. When they get there, it looks like, Greentown, Ohio. It's like, oh my God, this is where I grew up. And all the astronauts run off, like mystified, to go, and apparently everyone's dead loved ones up there. So, your grandparents died when you were little. They're living there on Mars, and it looks like the Earth, but it looks like your childhood place. And the captain ends up, meeting his dead parents and staying there the night. And then he thought, well, imagine if this was just a ruse by the aliens, to get our defenses down, to really make us believe that Mars is heaven, and then in the dead of night and then his parents get up and they're Martians. And of course, they are Martians. Mars is heaven. All the way through the end of this novel, Mars is Heaven just has this big undercurrent. And, I understand Mars is Heaven and I understand Bag of Bones. It's a really far-reaching connection, but it goes. It really just fucking works. You're reading Stephen King's version of his, haunted ghost story, a woman murdered crying out for release. And then Mars is Heaven comes in there. You know why? Because he wanted it to. And he found a way to put it in there. So us Ray Bradbury fans, immediately made a connection to that. Even though it was a really far-reaching connection, we did. That's not the end. Okay, so Rose Madder. Now, everybody knows that's my third favourite Stephen King novel, Rose Madder, after Roadwork and Du Marquis. But in Rose Madder, Janis Joplin is constantly singing her Rosie Real song. I'm really Rosie and I'm Rosie Real. You better believe me, I'm a great big deal. I'm pretty sure even one of the chapters maybe be called Rosie Real. Viva the Bull. Anyway. So, people I know that are a bit older than me, I mean, I love Janis Joplin, but people that actually maybe remember it being on the fucking wireless when they were fucking teenagers. So, oh man, you're sitting there reading this book from the late 90s by Stephen King, and Janis Joplin's just representing all the way through. That's a way to make a connection to the material. Rose Madder is about a woman who buys a haunted painting. A battered woman who buys a haunted painting. But it's not, because you've got all these, connections back to that. And it also makes a connection back to nature and mother foxes. But I won't go into that. But that's another deep part of it. Du Marquis, my second favourite novel. It's a book about a man who loses his arm and gets the supernatural psychic ability to sort of paint, even though he's a one-armed man, and he's possessed by it, but there's a complete undertone in this book also. how to draw a picture. And Stephen King's never really touched on your visual artist. You know, how many of Stephen King's protagonists are writers or school teachers or laundromat workers? But the fact that we've got a painter, you know, if you've ever read David Morrell, a lot of his characters are painters. I really like that. But the how to draw a picture, every single chapter in Do Marquis, big chapter, like part, is how to draw a picture 1, how to draw a picture 2, and it embeds itself into the story. You know, and you get that undertone. And there's also a lot of poetry in it. You know, we came here to dig for treasure. Super cool. But it's not a horror story about, you know, this monster from the sea who uses people's psychic powers to bring her back from the dead and kill family members. Because you could actually say that about Do Marquis. It's not. It's just got this entire undertone of art and what you are creating. And it goes back to Salvador Dali, and it's gives you something that you can connect to. It's, hey, look, it's a trademark that he didn't have to trademark. He mentioned it. But he didn't just say, oh, my character's eating at McDonald's, you know, or we made some fucking sandwiches, we went to Walmart. You know, he actually made it a part of the story. From a Buick 8, you know, from a Buick 6 is that Bob Dylan song. And there's a lot of undertones in it from a Buick 8, but, you know, it makes a connection for me. Bob Dylan, man, you know, bring it on. And then quickly I have to mention Christine, because the entire Christine is based on every single song you love from the 50s and the 60s. It might just be the 50s, actually, completely, yeah, like 1950 to 1959. Teenage love songs, teenage car songs, teenage death songs. You know, so, and that's another way, like, but that's literally every single, not chapter, so every single chapter, so not part, every single chapter of Christine will sing you a song and take you back to the 50s where you were, you know, at the drive-in with your favourite girl. But it's a way to connect to the material you're reading. And I think it may have even started with Salem's Lot. I'm not going to say there's all that kind of stuff in Carrie. But in Salem's Lot, there's a poem called The Emperor of Ice Cream. And it's about death and how there is no other emperor but the Emperor of Ice Cream, you know, the finality of death. I probably don't understand the finer points of it because I've never studied poetry and I can't write it to save my life, even though I appreciate it because Peter Straub is one of my favourite writers and fucking nearly every second sentence will make you appreciate poetry. But, so Salem's Lot might have been the first one to do it with the Emperor of Ice Cream, even though it's a story about vampires taking over a small town. If that was a Whitley Strieber novel, sorry, not Whitley Strieber, if that was a Bentley Little novel, I doubt you'd get that Emperor of Ice Cream in there. I don't think you would. You'd enjoy yourself, but you wouldn't get that personal touch. So, I'm starting with Steve here. I'm glad we're still talking about Steve. Now, sometimes he invents his own way for you to connect to the material and make this horror novel that you're reading stand out beyond other people's horror novels that came out that year. You know, you're waiting for the latest Dean Koontz. You're waiting for the latest Richard Lehman before he passed away. You know, you're waiting for the latest Dan Simmons. You're waiting for the latest Clive Barker. But what you get is Pet Sematary, okay? Now, like I said, the Ramones is a tiny little undercurrent in that, but Stephen King he probably came across this great poem that he invented, The Soil of a Man's Heart. And instead of writing a poem, The Soil of a Man's Heart, which has just all these meanings, he grounded it and drenched it in one of the darkest horror novels he's ever written, Pet Sematary. So constantly these characters are thinking about this thing. The soil of a man's heart is stonier. A man grows what he can and he tends it. And what you buy is what you own, and what you own always comes home, dear. Do you know what I mean? Now, that isn't a poem by fucking George, whatever his name is. You know, King uses him. That's not from the Book of Cowan Sorrows. Stephen King come up with that, and it fits perfectly with his really dark horror novel, Pet Sematary. And it constantly comes up. And then we've got Oz the Great and Terrible. Oz the Great and Terrible. You know, like that is another connection. It's not a story about a guy who moved in next to an Indian burial ground and people started dying and the power brought everybody back and it was horrible. It is. But that entire undertone of Stephen King writing from the heart and actually giving you something you're going to fucking remember because he made it that way. And he made sure you did because you know what? He was fucking really enjoying himself doing it. So Pet Sematary. Now, the Langoliers is a quick mention. The Langoliers, the story about them people, they're on a plane, everybody disappears, and it's a time travel story. Okay, so in the Langoliers, our main character, starts off character, Brian. Is it Brian? Fuck, I've been talking so much in this review. Our pilot, played by David Morse in the movie. But our pilot that we start Langoliers off, he has a dream about his dead wife putting a hand over a hole in a high-pressure fucking window of a flight over LA and getting sucked through the window. But on the window, it's written, "Shooting stars only." And then as we get to the end of this story, that's a great way to start it. It's almost like he was just having fun writing something. But the story bewitched him, and we actually ended up getting an over 100-page novella about time travel. And at the end, the "shooting stars only" weird quote that Stephen King put at the start actually connected into the story. And it's like when I think of Langoliers, I think of "shooting stars only," even though I couldn't really tell you what I meant. Even though, look at those people flying back and forth through time into the night sky. Surely they're shooting stars. The Aurora Borealis, shooting stars only. He created that. But it's not just a story about people going through some sci-fi bullshit. There is an undercurrent of something that may make you remember it a bit more than that other story that came out earlier, by that sci-fi writer who just crammed sci-fi down your face. You need that heart. So Pet Sematary, Langoliers. All right, so that's it. We finished talking about King. Now I'm going to quickly talk about Joe. And the reason I wanted to talk about this to you, see, I know this about Stephen King. It's what makes me keep coming back to read him, that undercurrent of personal material that makes me connect to the story I'm reading way more than other people that I read. Peter Straub does it, John D. MacDonald does it, not as obviously, and Peter Straub does it so subtly and so constantly, you'll probably find yourself very confused. I just find myself in dreamland, loving every verse like it's a fucking chocolate sundae. Anyway, so let's talk about Joe Hill, his youngest son. His first book, Heart-Shaped Box. Now, Joe Hill's a little bit older than me. I don't think he's much older than me. I'm 36. I was born in 1984. His first book is about buying a ghost on the internet, Heart-Shaped Box. Now, Nirvana had their hit song, Heart-Shaped Box, and I know he's from the era where he appreciated grunge music. I mean, check him out. Fucking Joe Hill, looking like his dad. What a fucking legend. Right, so that's a small little thing. That's a maybe. But let's talk about The Fireman. The Fireman, and that is a really ambitious horror novel. It's a science fiction horror novel and it's also an end of the world sort of a novel, a dystopian thing, and it's called The Fireman. And right at the start, he does what Stephen King does. He talks directly to his reader and says, "Hey, this book is called The Fireman. I'd like to thank my dad for giving me all the ideas that I've stolen." He doesn't say that, but it's something like that. "And I'd like to thank Ray Bradbury for the title that I stole, and my dad for all the rest," kind of thing. Because his dad wrote Firestarter. And at the start of Firestarter, it says, "It was a pleasure to burn, Ray Bradbury." That is the first sentence in Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit fucking 451. A famous novel from the 50s about firemen who burn things instead of putting it out. Now, Joe Hill's novel, The Fireman, is about this genetic thing that starts making humans spontaneously combust. And we meet heroes, we meet beautiful people, we meet really strong characters and watch them make mistakes and watch them go through what they do. It's actually a really good novel. I read it in hospital. My favourite is 20th Century Ghosts. I just love that short story collection. I think it's the greatest. And I love his Strange Weather, because of the story loaded about gun control. But that's not what I'm talking about. So, I don't have too many, examples about Joe, but think about this. Joe Hill writes some really good stuff. You enjoy it. And a lot of you Stephen King fans out there, you think, is he stealing this? Is he just regurgitating this from King? It's his dad. He's doing it good. Maybe he's just continuing on. I don't think he's continuing on. I think he learnt from the best, and Stephen King learnt from the best. Stephen King learnt from Ray Bradbury. He learnt from Richard Matheson. He learnt from John D. MacDonald. He learnt how to actually give a shit about characters, and he learnt how to get the reader to fucking give a shit by making those connections. And they can be small, subtle, but they're really good connections, and they work. And if you know how to use them, you're the best. Now, Joe Hill, I feel he started doing it straight away. It's not something he really had to learn, you know. I guarantee he was this little fella reading them comic books and them horror stories, you know. But I'm just saying, I think Joe Hill understands everything I've just told you. I think to him it's second nature, and I think that when he actually writes a story, he has an idea. So I write stories. I'm like, all right, I'm going to make spiders kill all these people. I'm going to make, this tree come alive and murder this single alcoholic father, and it's going to have some ironic ending, right? Ha ha ha. But I haven't thought about the characters yet, have I? I might actually start writing that bullshit down. What Joe Hill does is he gets his characters. The same way Stephen King does, but Stephen King, in his younger years, didn't do it all the time. You'd come across that generic Stephen King character, which is just Stephen King being the protagonist himself, putting that character in there. But to me, Joe Hill started straight away with his first short stories from 20th Century Ghosts, with his first novels. He actually really worked on them characters first. And I think it shows. And I think his dad knows that. I think us fans know that. So even if you're out there and you've only read a couple of Joes and you're like, oh, it's very similar to Stephen King. It's like, yeah, but think about how many other authors out there started writing because they love Stephen King. I'm one of them. And just put out generic novel after generic novel, using gore and stuff's fantastic. Shock value, I love. But if you're just like, there's certain, I don't want to say Dean Koontz because he's written some brilliant fucking horror novels where you care about the characters. But some of the time, it just seems like he's writing you a book because it's book time. Now, that's not writing from the heart. So I think Joe learnt, don't ever publish a story unless it's from your heart. I guarantee every single story is from the heart, even though 90% of Stephen King stories are from the heart, because he's like Bob Dylan. Stephen King just wrote everything that occurred to him. Every song, bad or good, it's like, well, it has to be written. You write every day, just like Ramsey Campbell says. So I think so. I think Stephen King had a few slip-ups in his early career, but now completely writes from the heart. Joe Hill learnt that really early, and he's always written from the heart, and I think he always will. And that's why we're only ever going to see Joe Hill get better and better and better, and he's younger than his dad, and one day when the inevitable happens, when I take a year off life, when Cy King passes away, no, pray to God he never does, but I want Joe to be writing for the next 40 years, and I have faith that they're just going to get better and better and better and better, and we're going to get 40 years of movies from the man too, so that's it from this rant. This is a really good editorial. I had a great fun talking about this with you guys. Please leave a book or a topic in my comments, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I can, and I'll discuss it, and I'll give you a shout out. Like, subscribe, ring the bell, because I do 2 of these a week, sometimes 1. Look after one another. Watch some really good movie. Read some even better books. And please, don't take any shit from anyone. See ya.